Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be looking at the next part of my in-depth review of Shane Dawson's first book, I Hate My Selfie. We reviewed the first 6 chapters in the introduction in the last 2 videos, so today we're jumping straight in with chapter 7. Random little bits of admin before we start. One is that I just got my latest bundle of fan mail stuff forwarded onto me, so if you want to see my responses and reactions to that, please go follow me on Instagram and have a look at the fan mail highlight, because there's lots of thank yous and cool stuff there and shout outs to people who sent me amazing stuff. So if you sent me anything and you want to see my reaction, head on over there. Other things are apologies if I'm a little bit tired in this video. It's 11 PM at night and I've slept most of the day because lockdown is messing with my head and the depression is slipping back in, so I'm a bit of a mess, so please excuse me and bear with me, but this is the first time I've got myself together in a while, so bear with me please. And the third and final thing is just a random shameless bit of self-promotion and a little response to a few comments I've got, because a lot of people are like, oh, you want to review negative books, don't you even like anything, me. And I'm like, well, yes, of course I do. I actually read a hell of a lot of books, and if you want to find out what I'm reading, get a few recommendations, see a few miniature reviews, mostly I just give them a star rating out of 5. You can go follow me on Goodreads, because I read probably between 100 and 150 books a year, and I record most of them on there. There's probably a few I forget, but if you want to keep up with what I'm reading and the stuff that I do enjoy reading and that I do like, check that out over there. There's also a few videos you can watch, such as the top 5 books I read in 2020 and this video of poetry books that I recommend and love, and I'll link them down in the description below. So with that, let's jump into Shane Dawson. Today we're starting off with chapter 7, which is titled My Birthday Suit, and this one we're just going to skip briefly past and give you a quick overview of, because I don't really have much to say about it, especially not anything too bad. To summarize, basically, Shane is at a point in his life where he's lost a lot of weight, so he has a lot of excess skin on his body. He's very self-conscious about it. So there's this one day when he's going to a theme park with his friends. He borrows a swimming costume from his mum to try and tuck it all in. You know, think control pants, but swimming costume. However, security at the park ends up lifting his t-shirt up and trying to embarrass him, and it's really nasty of them. But his friends don't really care at all, and they're like, mate, we're glad you're here, we don't care what you're wearing. And that's actually really nice. It's a good message to the story. It's talking about something that I think a lot of people go through, which is body image issues and confidence and that kind of thing. And I think it's especially important that more men talk about that. Brilliant, can't find fault with it. He's open about his insecurities, he's open about how he tries to overcome them, and like I say, it ends with a nice message about good friends not caring how you look and just caring about who you are. As always, there are a few jokes in there that aren't really to my taste, but compared to the rest of the book, chapter's pretty decent, pretty spot on. I don't have any major complaints. I can't even speak. So let's move on to chapter 8, which I do have some complaints about, called Internet Famous. And in it, Shane starts to talk about his life once he starts to gain a bit of popularity on YouTube. So even though this isn't something that I really care about personally, I think it's a good thing to include in the book, because it seems like the kind of thing that Shane's fans want to hear about. Things like how his life has changed, how he dealt with finding internet fame, ups, the downs, that kind of thing. It seems like a good chapter. Kyra's making a bed in the background. So yeah, I had high hopes for this chapter going in. Like I say, high hopes, but then we start off with this lovely racist stereotype and a disgusting reference to bodily functions, which I won't read out, but this. So, Shane Dawson, disappointing me already. That would have probably been a better name for this book. The irony of this section and this description in the book is that he describes his whole experience as a very in-depth conversation that went on for about 2 hours and 2 baskets of chips too long, which funnily enough is how I would describe most of the attempts at jokes in this book. And then he just dives straight in with another reference to animal abuse, this time in the form of, as I was mid-story about one incident during which my dog licked my butthole while I was masturbating, and I didn't push him away. Come on, we've all been there. A table nearby started yelling my name. No, Shane, we've not all been there. As a dog mother myself, no. That's not somewhere I'm even ever gonna come close to thinking about, never mind going. No. Genuinely, the amount of stories or jokes, not just in this book, but in all of Shane's content in general, his podcast stuff, his past videos, his sketches, and interviews he's done, the amount of stories or jokes he tells about abusing animals is genuinely worrying. I get that he's trying to be edgy or whatever, but like I say, as a dog mum myself, it disgusts me to even think about someone even making those jokes about Kyra. I don't know, maybe some people are going to call me overly sensitive, but I'm very protective of animals and kids, and I just think there's some things that it's not appropriate to make that kind of joke about. Anyway, back to the story, and he gets recognized by a bunch of teenagers, and he says this happens a lot, but often with 8-year-olds, which again concerns me because, like we were talking about in the other videos, this is kind of him acknowledging that his main fan base are literal children. And yet this is the kind of content that he's trying to sell to them. Literal children, where he's talking about sex and horrible graphic bodily stuff, racism, a little bit of homophobia in places, animal abuse. It's just not what I would want an 8-year-old reading. My nephew is 6, 7, something like that, and this is not something I would ever want him to look at, especially not at that age. He goes on to write, "The whole idea of being recognized in public is something that I never imagined would happen to me, much less that I'd be comfortable with. As a kid, all I wanted to be was invisible. I didn't want anyone to notice me, I was never the class clown, and I did everything I could to make myself blend into the background." Which I actually think is a really, really interesting point, and that I'd like him to expand on more, because this is in direct contrast to what he said just 3 chapters ago, and you can watch it in the last video, in which he was talking all about how all I could think about was getting rich and famous, and how he just wanted to be on TV and be a celebrity. I genuinely wish he'd written more about this, because I want to know what happened, what changed, how did he go from I want to be invisible to I just want to be rich and famous, I don't really care how. That's what I'd like to read about, but again, we have Shane just kind of missing the mark and ignoring all the potentially interesting stuff and falling back on poop and animal abuse jokes instead. He writes, "The first time I was recognised for my YouTube videos was when I was 18 years old and I was going to the doctor to get a physical. The doctor's assistant walked out to greet me and she had an expression on her face I'd never seen before. It was the look of someone who had just seen a dead person or a leprechaun. She appeared to be in shock and didn't move for a good 5 seconds." The following conversation that we get is very r/that happened, but let's give Shane the benefit of the doubt and assume that this woman did actually recognise him, and this is vaguely based on a true story. We get a really creepy sequence of events of this woman who's apparently an assistant, or like maybe a nurse or something in a doctor's office, of her being incredibly unprofessional when she realises that she's going to be assisting with Shane's physical exam. Shane writes, "As I told her I was getting a physical, her face went from I just saw a leprechaun to I'm a cartoon dog and I just saw a cartoon steak. She sat on a stool and swiveled over to me. She got so close that her knee was up against my poorly shaven balls. The only thing between her knee and my sad sack was a gown thinner than Bible paper, and I was praying to Jesus Christ that it wouldn't rip." This whole section we see Shane being very uncomfortable and wanting to leave, and it is actually really difficult to read. And the thing is, with the way that Shane's telling it, I think it's a really awful message to send to your admittedly child fans, because when you're talking about things like going to the doctor and stuff, and you have this audience, this impressionable audience, you need to make sure that you're sending them the right message. And when you go to the doctor, you should feel completely safe and comfortable. Your doctor should never make you feel uncomfortable or unsafe. Your doctor should never not be professional. In this situation, Shane had every right to leave or ask for a different member of staff or anything. Just say, I'm not comfortable with this. And that's what he should be teaching his young child audience, teaching them that they have control over their bodies and have every right to feel safe and comfortable and in control, especially in a medical setting. Instead, he just makes his discomfort a punchline, and he makes it seem like being uncomfortable is just something you have to deal with, and it's just normal. And I think that's a really irresponsible message to be teaching children. So in the end, the doctor comes in as well and recognises him, and the doctor just like references his skits and asks him to do some racist impressions. So I guess it's not as bad as Shane was expecting, but I still think it's setting a bad example of you just have to sit back and be uncomfortable and let people touch your body intimately when you don't want them to, which is an awful message to send to children, but there we go. And in this whole little sequence, we actually see Shane admitting that his videos are offensive and racist and classist, as he refers to them as the doctor asking him to tell offensive jokes in a ghetto woman's voice. Weirdly though, he doesn't see this as a bad thing. God knows why. The rest of us all do. He writes, "From that point on, it only got crazier. Over the next 7 years, I would be stopped for pictures while I was peeing in a urinal, while I was vomiting outside of a theme park roller coaster, even while I was on the side of the road after I got into a car accident. But I would also learn how to handle it all surprisingly well." And again, this is the part that I wish he'd expanded on more. How did he learn to handle it? What changed? How did he learn to appreciate his fans while still enforcing boundaries with them? That's what I want to read about. That's the kind of struggle I want to hear about. That's what I wish he'd written more about, and not just him sitting back while medical professionals made him uncomfortable. The next part has, like so many parts of this book, aged like milk, another potential title for the book. Nowadays, I never take it for granted, and I know that if it wasn't for people watching my videos, I wouldn't be able to do the amazing things I've been able to do in the last several years. Then he talks a bit about his first VidCon, and we get this really creepy line. Seeing my face plastered on a bunch of underage girls' chests was definitely not something I ever thought would happen. Just like I never expected my actual face would ever be on an of-age girl's chest in my life. So just like in the first two videos, we spoke about how he lacks these boundaries between himself and children, and we're seeing it again here. Admittedly, this time not as bad as in the other videos. He's not comparing himself to a 12-year-old. He's not soliciting children for literal pornography like he was in the other videos, but it's still indicative of him having some boundary issues. He then goes on to tell a story of being confronted by fans when he needed to use the bathroom at a restaurant, and ends up by saying that one of them kind of insulted him by saying he was kind of ugly in person. And again, the bit he follows is something that I would have liked to have seen him explore more, something that I genuinely think is interesting. He wrote, "Either way, I wanted to be invisible. It was the first time since I was young that I had that feeling of wishing I could dissolve into the background. It's like she reached into my bean-filled body and ripped out my soul with her hand and crushed it. I went home after that and lay in bed for a good few hours and cried. I cried hard." And I think this is actually a great little passage. The vulnerability and insecurity on display here is something that I think a lot of us can relate to. I have a lot of respect for anyone who talks openly about feelings like this, and I just wish he'd covered it in more detail and taken the whole thing more seriously and tried to maybe help the readers if they're going through something similar as well, instead of just kind of making it a joke. Because instead of talking about how he deals with that insecurity and how he overcomes it, all we ever get from him is, "I never want to go back to being invisible, even if it means having to deal with the occasional person saying something rude to me. It's worth it." Which again is very, very telling and tells us a lot about Shane, his motivations, his values, but it's not really explored in any depth like I wish it was. It's just kind of like a single line. And I think when we take parts of the book like this and apply those kind of same feelings and motivations and values that he's displaying here to the stuff that's going on in his life now, I think we can see some very interesting parallels. You know, the way Shane's been acting with the whole Jeffree Star and Trisha Paytas thing, I think it tells us a lot. I think Shane is basically saying here in the book, fame and money is how I gauge success, not by how happy I am or how good my mental health is or what positive impact I'm having on the world. He just clearly wants to be known. He wants publicity. I think he thinks any publicity is better than no publicity. And I think there are a lot of parallels there between how he's acting now with the whole Jeffree Star situation and how he is arguably prioritizing money and notoriety over credibility and the entire community having any respect for him and his actual friendships with people like Trisha. Or at least that's how it seems. I don't know. It's impossible to like psychoanalyze someone based on a few lines in a book or a few videos or anything like that, and I would never want to make any assumptions and say Shane is like this, Shane isn't like this, Shane did this was his motivation. But I think we can say, hey, maybe this suggests this, maybe this explains this. This is one possible reason that this, and this, you know? It's worth thinking about, it's interesting. Moving on to chapter 9, and it's titled How to Survive a Horror Movie, and Shane starts to tell us about his obsession with horror films. It's a pretty straightforward little chapter, not really anything out there until we get to this incredibly revealing little section, which reads, "I think the reason I became so obsessed with watching people die in movies is because it was a way for me to feel in control. I had very little control of my life as a kid, and there was so much chaos and turmoil around me. My parents were always fighting, and we had a lot of financial struggles. Watching horror films was a way for me to escape that and watch people who had even worse lives than me." He also reveals a little bit later, "Another attempt at control was to hold in my poop. I would hold it in for days," which I think he included as a joke, but there's a lot in there. And if there's any psychologists in the comments who want to have a dig at that, please tell me what you think. But I think this whole thing about, you know, him being into horror movies to feel in control, again, very revealing, tells us a lot about him, and that's something that I do wish was explored in a little more detail. There's another couple of inappropriate jokes here about CP, which, for the sake of my stomach, I'm not going to go over in any detail, but I will put them on screen. Again, I think this tells us a lot about Shane. It's very interesting. We're seeing that lack of boundaries with children. We're seeing that he doesn't really take child abuse in any form seriously and makes it the butt of a joke, which again is a huge problem and a pattern we're seeing throughout this book and his other content. Interesting but disturbing. These are all potential book titles better than I Hate My Selfie. Like, let me know down in the comments now, if you were retitling this book, what would you name it? Shane moves on to talk about the awful horror film he was in, Smiley. God, awful film, but I think Shane again reveals something interesting about his motivations here when he talks about accepting that role. Because, like, you know how a lot of actors, when you're like, oh, why do you take this role? They often talk about maybe like relating to the character, or they enjoyed the script, or they felt it was telling an important story, it had an important message, they liked working with the director or a co-star, something like that. Shane's motivation is, before he could even describe the plot, I was already 1000% in. I could already picture myself covered in blood, screaming for my life. I could also picture how many memes of me getting killed were going to be made by my haters. I was pumped. So again, kind of all comes back to this idea that Shane is motivated by gaining notoriety and money rather than actually enjoying the creative process. And I think this is completely backed up by the entire documentary that was made about him making his film Not Cool. I don't know if you've seen that. There's also some fantastic videos on YouTube about it, which I'll link down in the comment below, especially Nick's video. Brilliant. Yeah, I think combine his actions on screen there with what we're reading about here. And again, I can't make any definitive claims, but it does seem like notoriety and money are bigger motivators for Shane than enjoying doing something creative. Interestingly, he goes on to talk about how he feels pretty out of depth on set at first, but then it all starts to go pretty well and it's quite good, he thinks. Or at least it goes as well as it could, considering how bad the film turned out. He makes a few mildly gross jokes, but then there's this one that just really disgusts me. Everything was going great up until the last day of the shoot. I should have known it was going to be rough, considering I'd had like 5 rape dreams in a row the night before, and I only usually have 2. Again, this isn't the first time he's used rape as a punchline in this book, and I just don't think there's any justification for it. It's gross. Shane then has a little moan because some other actor takes his trailer and he states he's not a diva, but then proceeds to stalk this actor online and boast about having more followers and better engagement than him, and it's all just very Mean Girls. It's ugh. I did go on a few dates with a guy like this who was always like comparing our numbers online and like, oh well, I've got this many more Instagram followers than you. I'm like, yeah, but you also have like 200 YouTube subscribers. I have like 160,000. Do you really want to compare numbers here? But he was very like particular about it, and I always found it like really weird, and he'd always kind of like point out who got more likes on a picture and stuff, and it was odd. There's a reason I broke up with him. Backstage, Shane is preparing for a kissing scene, and this other actress comes over to his scene partner, and she gives her a little pep talk, right? And she tells us stuff about, you know, don't do anything she's not comfortable with. This actress, she shares some of her experiences on different sets. She makes it very clear to this woman that, you know, she can say no to anything she's not comfortable with. It's good, really important advice, particularly in the light of what we know now thanks to the Me Too movement. I think it's really important that women have these conversations with each other. Great stuff. I was actually like really happy to read that women were talking like this on set. Shane wasn't. Shane takes this woman trying to give her colleague some good, important advice as a personal insult, and we see Shane's angry, mean side come out again. He writes, I was pissed. How could this random actress who had never even spoken to me assume that I was some kind of pervert who was trying to F my co-star? If anything, I just wanted to do my job as quickly as possible and go home so I could finish my binge session of some terrible reality show about a family who has a worse life than me. And then he goes on and gets quite mean about the woman staying on set. The woman decides to stay on set, right, with her co-star to kind of like make her feel a little bit more comfortable and kind of back her up and stuff. And Shane gets really, really mean about it. And he ends up blaming this woman for like putting him off and making him have the worst kiss I've ever had. And just, there's this whole exchange. It just feels really off and weird. Ugh, I don't know, just weird to me. He then writes about his co-star. She told me about how nervous she'd been to kiss on camera. It was her first time, so I totally understood where she was coming from. She also said it didn't help that the crazy actress girl was trying to act like a big sister and keep her safe from all the big, mean rapist actors on set. I'm just gonna guess, the woman never said that. Shane's definitely putting words in her mouth. Probably. I'm not sure what gave that girl the impression that I was a rapey perv, but honestly, I was just happy she didn't assume I was gay like every other stranger I meet daily. Again, kind of weird for Shane to make it all about him, and again, this is a pattern throughout the book where other people are talking about their issues and Shane makes it all about himself. Like, the woman who was giving her co-star advice clearly had had a lot of negative experience in the industry as a whole, and instead of Shane saying to her, like, hey, I hear you, I want to be part of the solution, don't worry, I'm not going to do that, how can I make you both more comfortable? Instead, he just resorted to insulting her and calling her crazy and being an even bigger part of the problem. And then he ends with a disgusting joke about one day showing his kids porn. Disgusting. The lack of boundaries between him and children, again, is just not okay. And with that, that's where we are going to end this video. But thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking with me as I do these in-depth reviews and these deep dives into Shane's book and his content. Next time, we are going to be looking at chapter 10, which is called The Mean Girl Got Fat, and it includes a lot of fat shaming and bitchiness and just... ugh. So if you want to see that video, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and get notified when I upload new videos. And don't forget to help me out by leaving a like on this video, leaving a comment. All the engagement is really good and it helps my channel and means I can keep creating awesome content for you guys and pay my bills and keep a roof over my head. So yeah, thank you so much for watching today. I appreciate you guys a hell of a lot, and I'll see you again very, very soon.